Hey everyone, look around. Guess where I am on today's episode? It may look like I'm inside a cruise ship, but actually I'm inside the home of Peter Knego. Hey everyone, welcome back to Sky Girl Reporter. And today we are here with Peter Knego, and he is a maritime historian and maybe the most greatest cruise ship expert in the world. So let's say hi. Hi!
Hey Sky! Welcome! So nice to have you here in I'd like to call it a ship, but it's really just a house that's filled with all kinds of stuff from ships. So it's really an honor to have you. And yeah, you are actually sitting on a chair from a ship, the table's from another old ship, an old British ocean liner, the paintings, a clock, everything on the walls comes from an old classic ocean liner.
Well, thank you for inviting me. And your house looks very amazing.
Thank you. Well, it's been a lot of work, and all the stuff that's in the house was made in an era when they spent a lot of time with craftsmanship, and they had beautiful materials like mahogany and zebrano wood and teak and stuff that they just can't use anymore. A, because of safety regulations, and B, a lot of the stuff is no longer available. It's like teak wood. You can't get teak wood because the teak forests are endangered, so they can't be taking the trees down now. So a lot of this stuff is from another era and a time when there was beauty and there was a lot of respect for the craftsmanship of building a ship.
Wow! What is a maritime historian?
Well, a maritime historian is somebody who studies and specializes in the history of ships. I specialize in ocean liners and cruise ships. Those are the ones that I like. I'm not big on canoes and sailing ships and warships so much. And ever since I was a kid, probably just a year or two older than you, I've loved ships. So I bought books on them, and I went to travel agencies and got brochures. And then when I found out I could actually visit ships, I went to visit them. I would have my mom or dad drive me down to the harbor and go on board the ships for a day and photograph everything. And that was my hobby for many, many years. And I did it so long that I ended up becoming an expert on the subject. So I know all kinds of stuff about ships that nobody else in their right mind would ever want to know. But every now and then people want to know the history of a particular ship, and they come to me to get the answers.
How did you get interested in cruise ships?
It goes back to 8th grade. I was in American history, and my teacher assigned me a paper on the Lusitania, which was the ship when it was sunk by the Germans. It helped bring America into World War I. So I thought it was a battleship. I didn't quite know the whole story. And then when I found out it was a beautiful ocean liner with 4 smokestacks and it sank sort of like the Titanic did, I thought, wow, this is interesting. So I wanted to learn more. And then that got me going and learning. I got every book I could. There were movies like The Poseidon Adventure that I went to see probably 20 times. The Queen Mary was in Long Beach, so I would have my parents take me down to visit the Queen Mary. And the more I learned, the more interested I got. And that kind of brought me to where I am now.
That's fascinating. How many cruise ships have you been on?
It's a very good question, Sky. I think, I haven't counted, but I've been on over 300 cruises, but I've been on maybe 500, 600, 700 ships altogether since I was a kid. But I don't have a specific number. It's just a lot. Yeah.
I bet. What's the difference between a cruise ship and an ocean liner?
Very good question. And I wish a lot more of the people who are actually in the cruise industry understood the difference. Ocean liners were built to go from one place to another, from point A to point B, in all weather. So they were built with long bows and reinforced hulls so that they could navigate the Atlantic in the winter or the Pacific in the winter or anywhere that there were rough seas. They had to get people from one place to another. They tended to have engines that were very powerful. They could go faster than the cruise ships do today. And they were built with a sense of pride, and almost they were like ships of state. So there was a certain pride and craftsmanship that were put into building the ocean liners because they had to face the elements, and people were emigrating from one place to another and changing their lives. So they would put the best art, they would put the best furnishings. It would be like stepping into France if you stepped on the ship, the SS France, or stepping into Italy if you stepped on the SS Michelangelo. So they were really something that was built with pride and skill and craftsmanship. The Queen Mary II, you can see her with her long bow, which is built to go through the Atlantic, and her hull is thicker, and she's just a more purposeful looking ship than the modern cruise ships, which are almost boxy looking, and they're built to go into nice tropical weather where everything is calm, the seas are calm. They're pleasure cruises, so they're not built for withstanding the elements. And I could go on. There's a lot more differences, but I think that's pretty much the gist.
You don't just study cruise ships, you try to salvage and preserve them. How did you start doing that?
Oh, well, a very good question. When I was a kid, all my favorite ships were being sold for scrap. There was a fuel crisis, and there were all sorts of things happening to the ships. The airplane came in and the ships were no longer needed. So they were all being sent to a scrapyard in Taiwan, and it just drove me crazy that they were destroying these beautiful ships. So when I became an adult and I had a job, I was able to sort of pay to go to visit ships that I knew weren't going to be around very long. And my mission was to go all around the world and find all the old ships and document them. And once I did that, I had this collection of photographs. These ships in the early 2000s, after 9/11 and with the economy crashing, they were all being sold for scrap. And when that happened, I said, okay, now I can do something about this. When I was a kid, I couldn't. And so I contacted the scrapyards and I said, look, you have these chairs and you got this painting, how much is it to send that to me in California? And so the scrapyard responded, and they were able to sell things to me for more than they would get in India for the same things. So they loved me, and I bought a bunch of stuff. And when my first container of stuff arrived, all my friends saw the things that I was getting and said, hey, can you get me some of those chairs? And I thought, okay, that might make a good business. So I decided to not just get stuff for me, but for other people and interior designers and architects and ship collectors as well. So I started a business doing that, rescuing everything I possibly could that I felt was artistically beautiful or of such a quality that it couldn't be replicated today.
That's very cool. Where do you go to get the ship items?
Well, I go to a place in India called Alang, which is about 500 miles away from Bombay, which is the capital city of India. And there's a 30-foot tidal variance there. So at high tide, they run the ships up on the beach. And then when the water goes down, which it does every day, the workers can go out and they start taking the things off the ship and cutting the ship up so that they can melt it down for steel. And there's a big demand for steel in India, and the labor is cheap. So the workers flock there because it's hard to get work in India. So it's a place that's proven very, I'd say, financially motivating for a lot of people to send their ships to be scrapped. So I go there. I don't like what they do to the ships, but the only thing I can do is rescue what's on them and document the scrapping process because it's part of the history of the ship. So when I go, that's what I do. But it is a very, it's a very sad place because it's 10 miles long of a beach, and there's ships as far as the eye can see, these big gigantic ships the size of buildings, and they're just being scrapped. So it's not good for the environment. It's obviously not good for the ships, but ships have to be scrapped after a certain point because they're not safe, or they're just not economic to run, or they take too much fuel. There's all kinds of reasons ships have a finite life, so they have to be demolished at some point. So that's what happens.
What happens to the pieces that no one buys?
If it's a chair or, a piece of art, it gets bought. There's always somebody in India that wants to buy things for hotels and offices and things like that. They just don't know where it came from or what ship or if there's any history to it. It's like going to a yard sale or something, they'll buy it. There are certain things though, like panels and things that maybe nobody wants to buy, so they get recycled. If it's woodwork, they'll cut it up and they'll use it for fires to cook food or to keep warm. They burn it basically. And then they recycle things like glass and other elements. So there's always something being done, whether they're actually saving the item or recycling it.
People say that it's dangerous to go to these places and try to salvage these items by yourself.
Well, yes, there are definitely dangers. The weather can be terrible. They have monsoons there, so you have to be careful when you go out that you're not going to get stranded on the ship or caught in a tide that's going to whisk you off to sea. There's mosquitoes that give you malaria, so you have to take a medicine for that, but also stay covered up. And then you have to climb ladders and stuff. You have to be very careful. I'm lucky. I have a really good friend there. So when I go there, he takes me and he's looking after me, and he knows when the conditions are safe and when they're not. So I have, a lot of help when I go there, but I wouldn't recommend it just for anybody to try and go because it can be dangerous and you have to be very, very careful.
How many cruise ships have you salvaged items from?
That's a good question. I don't have a specific number, but I'd say probably about 50 altogether.
Is there any items too big to fit in your house?
There are. I still have a lot of things in storage, and big art panels and things that I would like to maybe put on the ceiling, but they're very heavy and it requires a lot of engineering. So yeah, I've got a bunch of stuff that's too big for this house. So maybe I need to find another house someday.
What do you want people to know about the loss of these historic ocean liners?
Well, I'd like people to know that these ships were really objects of beauty and superior architecture. They were built with a lot of concern for the aesthetics, and they were engineering marvels, and they were really special. I mean, imagine the Empire State Building sailing at 30 miles an hour, across the sea. Because that's basically what the old ocean liners were. The Queen Mary and Queen Elizabeth were pretty much that size. They were just really beautiful creations. There was a glamour and a class to ocean liners that has been lost. And, I just think the world needs to know more about it because there's a lot of people who love planes and trains and automobiles. But when it comes to ships, somehow the word isn't out. And I don't think people quite understand how beautiful these old ships were.
I wasn't so interested in ships before, but now I am. So thank you.
Well, thank you. And I'm really happy you're interested in ships because you can get the word out to people and let them know that they're really cool too. And people should be interested in them as well as all the other things that are popular.
I will. Now Peter Knego is going to take us on a tour of his house. Unfortunately, we're out of time for today, so tune in next time where Peter Knego gives us an amazing tour of his house and we get to see all the artifacts he collected from the cruise ships. So, see you guys then. Also, I'd like to thank Peter Knego for all his effort and for all the time he did for the interview. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope to see you next time. Bye, guys!